The phone call came at 6:47 in the morning. Jack Morgan wiped the grease from his hands, wondering who'd call his struggling auto shop this early. "Is this the mechanic who helped my daughter yesterday?" The voice was authoritative, refined. "I'm Alexandra Hayes. My driver will pick you up in 30 minutes." Jack glanced at his sleeping son, not knowing this simple act of kindness would change everything. The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of Jack Morgan's small apartment above his auto shop, Morgan's Repairs. At 42, Jack's face carried the weathered lines of someone who'd faced more than his fair share of hardship. His calloused hands, perpetually stained with engine grease, despite his nightly scrubbing, moved methodically as he prepared breakfast for his 9-year-old son, Ethan. The boy sat at their small kitchen table, eyeing the plain toast and eggs with a slight frown. Jack noticed but pretended not to. Groceries were running low again, and payday was still 4 days away. He'd need at least 2 more repair jobs this week to make ends meet. As he poured his son a glass of orange juice watered down to make it last longer, Jack felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. 5 years had passed since cancer took Emily, but some mornings the absence felt as fresh as yesterday. Jack ruffled his son's hair and managed a smile that reached his eyes. "Sorry, buddy. We're running low on groceries this week. But hey, I promise pancakes this weekend when Mrs. Daniels pays for her transmission work." The apartment was modest, but clean, a small 2-bedroom space that Jack had converted from storage above the garage when Emily got sick. The medical bills had taken everything else, including their house in the suburbs. But Jack had refused to be defeated. Once a promising mechanical engineer at an automotive design firm, he'd leveraged his skills into opening his own repair shop after being laid off during company restructuring. The timing couldn't have been worse, right as Emily's treatments were intensifying. Now, photographs of better days lined the walls, Emily's smile preserved in wooden frames. Jack in a suit at his former corporate job, Ethan as a toddler balanced on his father's shoulders. These weren't just decorations, they were reminders of the life they once had, and the promise Jack had made to his wife that their son would still have opportunities, still know happiness, no matter what. "Finish your cereal, champ." "Bus comes in 15 minutes, Jack reminded, checking the time on his worn watch, a gift from Emily on their 10th anniversary, just months before her diagnosis. As Ethan ate, Jack mentally calculated the day's appointments. The shop barely broke even most months, but it provided enough to keep them afloat and, more importantly, allowed him the flexibility to be there for Ethan. No after-school program for his boy. Jack adjusted his work schedule to close the shop at 3 o'clock each day, reopen after dinner, and often work late into the night to compensate. It wasn't ideal, but in the hierarchy of priorities Jack had established after Emily's death, Ethan's well-being came first. Money, comfort, even Jack's own rest came after. It was a promise he'd made to Emily in those final days, when the hospital machines beeped in rhythm with her fading heartbeat. Their son would never feel abandoned, not if Jack could help it. "Dad, do you think I'll make the math team?" Ethan asked, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. The boy was brilliant, another gift from Emily, who had been a high school math teacher. Despite their financial struggles, Jack was determined that his son's potential wouldn't be limited. He'd taken on extra repair jobs, negotiated payment plans for the advanced math workbooks Ethan's teacher had recommended, and stayed up late helping with practice problems even when his own eyes burned with exhaustion. "With your brain? They'd be crazy not to pick you," Jack answered, packing Ethan's lunch, simple peanut butter and jelly, an apple, and the last granola bar from the box. He slipped in a small note, as he did every day. "Proud of you, buddy. Dad." These notes had started as a way to help Ethan through the grief of losing his mother, but had become their special tradition. Some days, when a customer complained about a bill or when the rent came due without enough in the account to cover it, these small connections with his son were what kept Jack going. After seeing Ethan off to the bus stop visible from their window, Jack descended the back stairs to the shop below. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal greeted him, a smell that once represented career failure but now signified independence. The shop wasn't fancy, equipment was mostly second-hand, and the waiting area consisted of mismatched chairs and outdated magazines. But Jack took pride in his reputation for honest work at fair prices, often helping elderly customers or single parents with discounted repairs they couldn't afford elsewhere. Sometimes, he wondered if he was being foolish, if his generosity was actually hurting his business and, by extension, Ethan's future. But he couldn't bring himself to charge Mrs. Peterson full price when he knew her fixed income barely covered her medications, or to turn away Mr. Gaines when his delivery van broke down, even knowing the elderly man might be slow to pay. As he flipped the sign to open and began organizing tools for the day's first appointment, Jack briefly allowed himself to remember his former life, the corner office, the company car, the respective colleagues. Sometimes he wondered if Emily would be proud of what he'd become, or disappointed that all their plans had downsized to this modest existence. But then he'd remember what she whispered during her final days. "Promise me you'll show Ethan that success isn't what you have, but who you are when things fall apart." In his better moments, Jack believed he was keeping that promise. In his darker ones, usually late at night when the shop was quiet and Ethan was asleep, he feared he was just barely treading water, one unexpected expense away from drowning. Today would need to be a better moment. He had a transmission to rebuild and a timing belt to replace work that required focus, not doubt. The autumn rain had intensified by late afternoon, creating rivers along the curbs of downtown Millfield. Jack had just finished an oil change for Mrs. Peterson, charging her half price as always, knowing her fixed income barely covered her medications. He was wiping down his tools when he heard the distinctive sound of a vehicle struggling, followed by a hesitant tap on the glass door of his shop. He looked up to see a drenched teenage girl, perhaps 16 or 17, her mascara running down her cheeks and her expensive-looking clothes plastered to her slender frame. Jack's first thought was that she looked like someone from another world, one of those private school kids from the wealthy neighborhoods across town. His second thought was that she looked absolutely miserable. "We're actually closed," Jack said automatically, gesturing to the clock showing 3:15. He closed early on Tuesdays and Thursdays to coach Ethan's Little League team, one commitment he refused to compromise regardless of financial pressure. But something in the girl's desperate expression made him pause. There was a vulnerability there that reminded him of Ethan after a particularly rough day at school. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, setting down his rag. The girl pushed her wet hair from her face, revealing eyes red from crying. "My tire, I think it's flat," she stammered, her voice betraying both frustration and what sounded like embarrassment. "I was supposed to be home an hour ago, and my phone's dead, and my mom is going to absolutely kill me." Her words tumbled out between what Jack recognized as suppressed sobs, the kind Ethan would try to hide when he was trying to be brave. Jack glanced at his watch. Ethan would be waiting at the field, but the coach could start warm-ups without him. The thought of leaving this clearly distressed teenager alone in this state, especially as the rain continued to pour, didn't sit right with him. It was the kind of situation where he'd want someone to help Ethan, if positions were reversed. "Where's your car?" he asked, grabbing his portable toolkit and a rain jacket. The girl's relief was immediate and palpable, her shoulders dropping as she exhaled. "Just around the corner," she said, gesturing vaguely. I managed to pull into a parking spot before it completely gave out. Following her through the rain, Jack found himself at a sleek, white Audi convertible new model, probably worth more than his entire business. The contrast between the luxury vehicle and the girl's obvious distress struck him as peculiar. This wasn't just about a flat tire. "I'm Jack," he offered, kneeling beside the vehicle to examine the tire, which wasn't just flat but shredded. Rain soaked through his jeans as he crouched on the wet pavement, but he barely noticed. "Looks like you ran over something sharp. This needs more than a patch, you'll need a replacement." The girl hugged herself against the chill, looking even younger in her distress. "I'm Lily," she replied, wrapping her arms around herself as the rain continued to fall. "My dad would have known what to do, but she trailed off, biting her lip. Jack recognized that unfinished sentence had spoken many like it himself. Loss had a universal language, regardless of what kind of car you drove or what neighborhood you lived in. He felt a flicker of connection with this girl, despite their obvious differences. "Well, Lily, I can fix this, but I don't stock tires for this model. It'll take a day to order one." He noticed her shoulders slump further. "But I can put your spare on today to get you home safely." Lily looked at him blankly. "There's a spare?" She sounded genuinely surprised, and Jack suppressed a smile. For all the car's luxury features, its owner clearly hadn't bothered to educate their daughter on basic car maintenance. "In the trunk," he explained, already moving to access it. "Most cars come with them, even fancy ones like yours." As he worked efficiently despite the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, Jack found himself wondering about Lily's story. She didn't strike him as a spoiled rich kid throwing a tantrum over a minor inconvenience. There was something else going on here, something in her eyes that spoke of deeper troubles than a flat tire on a rainy day. As Jack worked on changing the tire, Lily alternated between anxious silence and nervous chatter. Gradually, a picture emerged. She had skipped her last class to visit her former music teacher who was moving away, a woman who had been the only one who ever really listened. She had lost track of time, then gotten lost driving back, ending up in this unfamiliar part of town where tire met unfortunate fate. My mom has these tracking apps on my phone, Lily explained, her voice small. When it died, she probably freaked out, thinking I've been kidnapped or something. She's intense about security. Jack nodded, focusing on securing the spare tire. He understood overprotective parenting had struggled with it himself after Emily died. The temptation to wrap Ethan in metaphorical bubble wrap had been strong, especially in those early days when it felt like the world was full of potential dangers waiting to snatch away the only person he had left. Parents worry. It's in the job description, he said simply, giving the lug nuts a final tighten. My mom takes it to another level. Ever since the divorce, and especially after what happened to my dad, she treats me like I'm made of glass or might disappear any second. There was a bitterness in Lily's tone that suggested layers of complicated family dynamics. Jack didn't press for details. Whatever had happened to her father wasn't his business, and he suspected Lily had already said more to this stranger in a rainy parking lot than she'd intended to. With the spare tire secured, Jack stood, wiping his hands on a rag. That should get you home, but don't go over 50 miles per hour on this spare. You'll need to get it replaced properly. He was already mentally calculating how late he would be for Ethan's practice, and whether he'd have time to change into dry clothes first. The rain had finally begun to let up, but both he and Lily were thoroughly soaked. How much do I owe you? Lily asked, reaching for a designer purse that had somehow stayed dry inside her jacket. Jack waved her off. Consider it a good deed. Just be careful driving home, and maybe call your mom from my shop phone so she knows you're safe. He wasn't sure why he made the offer, perhaps because she reminded him a bit of what Ethan might be like in a few years, or perhaps because despite the expensive car and clothes, there was something fundamentally lost about Lily that touched Jack's paternal instincts. Lily's eyes widened slightly, as if unused to unconditional kindness. Really? Thank you. She hesitated before adding, my mom can send someone to pay you. She's very particular about debts. The statement struck Jack as odd. What kind of parent instilled such concern about monetary obligations in a teenager? But he simply shrugged. No debt. Just do something nice for someone else sometime. As they walked back to his shop so Lily could use his phone, Jack noticed her studying the modest exterior of Morgan's repairs, her eyes lingering on the peeling paint and the handwritten special. 10% off for senior citizens sign in the window. Something in her expression shifted, not pity, but a kind of curious recognition, as if she were seeing something familiar in this unfamiliar setting. Inside, while Lily made her call, Jack noticed a small silver charm bracelet on her wrist, bearing an unusual emblem. He recognized the logo of Hayes Innovations, one of the country's leading tech companies. It was distinctive because he'd once applied for a job there after being laid off. Before opening his shop, he thought nothing of it. Probably just trendy jewelry that wealthy teenagers wore. After a brief, tense phone conversation punctuated with, "Yes, Mom, and I know, Mom, and I'm sorry, Mom," Lily hung up and turned to Jack with an expression that mixed relief and resignation. "She's sending someone to get me." Then, unexpectedly, she added, "You should put your number in my phone once it's charged, for when I need the real tire replaced." Jack scribbled his shop number on a business card, wondering why this seemingly privileged teenager looked so alone, despite apparently having resources many would envy. As she waited by the window for her ride, he noticed her gaze lingering on the single photograph on his counter, Jack and Ethan, at last year's fishing trip, both grinning widely despite having caught nothing. "Is that your son?" she asked softly. Jack nodded, unable to help the smile that always came when he thought of Ethan. "Ethan. He's 9 going on 30, he answered, pride evident in his voice. Lily smiled, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her. "You guys look happy." The simple observation carried weight, as if happiness were a rare commodity in her experience. Before Jack could respond, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside. Lily's posture immediately stiffened. "That's my ride. Thank you again, Mr. Morgan." As she hurried out, Jack called after her, "Remember, not above 50 on that spare." She nodded without turning back, and within seconds, the imposing vehicle had disappeared into the rain, leaving Jack with the distinct feeling that there was much more to Lily Hayes than a simple flat tire and a teenager's rebellion. The following morning dawned gray and misty, matching Jack's mood as he calculated monthly bills against projected income. He was short again. The rent for both the shop and apartment was due in a week, and unless 3 or 4 major repairs came through the door, he'd have to dip into Ethan's college fund, the small but sacred account he'd promised himself he'd never touch. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of constant financial pressure bearing down. This was the part of single parenthood that exhausted him the most, not the logistics of raising a child alone, but the relentless responsibility of being the only financial safety net for his son. The phone's shrill ring interrupted his grim calculations. Expecting it to be a customer calling to cancel, Jack answered with his practiced, cheerful tone. "Morgan's Repairs, this is Jack." "Mr. Morgan." The woman's voice was crisp, authoritative, the kind that expected immediate attention. "This is Alexandra Hayes. You assisted my daughter yesterday with her vehicle." Jack blinked, the name registering immediately. Alexandra Hayes, founder and CEO of Hayes Innovations, the tech empire whose logo he'd spotted on Lily's bracelet. Her face regularly appeared in business magazines and news segments about female leaders in technology. He straightened instinctively, though she couldn't see him. "Yes, ma'am. Just a simple tire change." His mind raced, wondering why a billionaire CEO would personally call about such a minor incident. Had he said something wrong to Lily? Was there some problem with the spare? "Nothing about ensuring my daughter's safety is simple, Mr. Morgan." Her tone was unreadable, neither grateful nor accusatory. "I'd like to discuss this matter in person. My driver can collect you in 30 minutes. It wasn't a question or a request, it was a statement of what would happen, delivered with the confidence of someone unused to hearing the word no. Jack frowned. He had customers scheduled, responsibilities. "Miss Hayes, I appreciate the offer, but..." She cut him off smoothly. "I understand you're a single father with financial considerations. You'll be compensated for your time." Jack bristled at this assumption, accurate as it might be. The idea that she thought his time could be simply purchased didn't sit well with him. But before he could formulate a response, she continued, her tone softening slightly. "Lily mentioned your son, Ethan, correct? I've taken the liberty of arranging for my personal assistant's nephew, a qualified childcare professional who works with my staff's children, to collect him from school and supervise him until your return. With your permission, of course." Jack's protest died in his throat. The presumption was staggering, yet the thoroughness of her planning left little room for practical objection. Still, something about this didn't feel right. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "If it's about payment for the tire change, that really isn't necessary." There was a pause on the line, brief but noticeable. When Alexandra Hayes spoke again, there was a subtle shift in her tone. "Mr. Morgan, I run a technology company valued at over $40 billion. I have 3 doctorate degrees and manage over 15,000 employees globally. Yet yesterday, I was unable to ensure my only child returned home safely. You, however, succeeded where my considerable resources failed. I believe that warrants a conversation." Something in her voice, a subtle undercurrent beneath the confidence, resonated with Jack. It was the sound of a parent who had been afraid. That he understood all too well. 30 minutes, he agreed, making a mental note to call Ethan's school and authorize this unexpected arrangement. As he hung up, Jack wondered what exactly he was getting himself into. Alexandra Hayes moved in circles so far removed from his own that they might as well be different planets. And yet, beneath the trappings of wealth and power, he'd heard something fundamentally familiar in her voice, the unmistakable concern of a parent worried about their child. Perhaps some things transcended social boundaries after all. Exactly 28 minutes later, a sleek black Maybach pulled up outside Morgan's Repairs. The driver, a professionally expressionless man in a dark suit, opened the rear door without a word. Jack, having changed into his least-stained shirt and run a hasty comb through his hair, felt acutely aware of every oil spot on his jeans as he slid into the leather interior that probably cost more than his annual income. He'd left Miguel, his part-time help, in charge of the shop, with strict instructions to call if anything came up that he couldn't handle. The car glided through the streets of Millfield, eventually leaving the familiar grid of the town behind and ascending into the exclusive hillside neighborhood of Cresthaven Estates, an area Jack had only ever entered to service wealthy clients' vehicles at their homes. They passed through an ornate gate bearing the Hayes Innovations logo, continuing up a winding driveway, flanked by precisely manicured landscaping. The house, if such an understated term could apply to the modernist glass and steel structure emerging from the hillside, looked like something from an architectural magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the cloudy sky, while minimalist water features created an atmosphere of serene wealth. As the car stopped at the entrance, Jack's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. "Thanks for coming. I didn't tell her I asked you to help me. Please don't say anything about my teacher." Lily Jack frowned at the cryptic message as the driver opened his door. What exactly was he walking into? The massive front door swung open, revealing not a butler or assistant as he'd expected, but Alexandra Hayes herself, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her dark hair swept into a precise updo that emphasized her striking features. Despite being in her mid-40s, her presence commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with physical beauty and everything to do with power. "Mr. Morgan," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss." Alexandra Hayes's home office reflected her public persona, meticulously organized, aesthetically minimalist, and designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the valley, where Millfield sprawled below, a not-so-subtle reminder of her literal and figurative position above the town. Jack sat stiffly in a chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent, acutely aware of the dirt under his fingernails despite his best efforts to scrub them clean. This was a woman who controlled a technology empire, whose decisions affected global markets. What could she possibly want with him? "Coffee?" she offered, gesturing to an elaborate espresso machine that looked more like laboratory equipment than a kitchen appliance. The gesture seemed oddly personal for what he had expected to be a formal, perhaps even confrontational, meeting. "Black is fine," Jack replied, determined to maintain his composure. He'd faced down corporate executives before, back in his engineering days, though admittedly, none quite as formidable as Alexandra Hayes. She prepared 2 cups with practiced precision, her movements economical. When she handed him the delicate porcelain cup, their fingers briefly touched a moment of humanizing contact that seemed at odds with the carefully constructed environment. "Mr. Morgan," she began, taking her seat behind the imposing desk. "Jack, please," he interrupted, a small assertion of equality. Something flickered across her expression, surprise, perhaps, at being interrupted. "Jack," she amended, inclining her head slightly, "I'll be direct. Yesterday, my daughter disappeared from her school's tracking system for 3 hours and 42 minutes. Given certain security concerns in our lives, this triggered our family protection protocols. I had 4 private security teams searching for her, the police on standby, and was 17 minutes away from contacting the FBI when her location suddenly reappeared at your establishment." Jack absorbed this with growing unease. The level of surveillance and security seemed extreme, but Lily's text now made more sense. "Miss Hayes," Lily mentioned her phone died. "That would explain Alexandra," she corrected, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. "And yes, her phone battery was depleted. What concerns me is why she was in that part of town at all." When questioned, Lily claimed she got lost after school. "My daughter has a photographic memory and an IQ of 142. She doesn't get lost." There was something both impressive and slightly sad about the clinical way Alexandra described her daughter, as if Lily were a particularly valuable asset rather than a teenager figuring out her place in the world. Jack shifted uncomfortably, Lily's text message weighing on his conscience. He understood the girl's desire for privacy, but sitting across from her mother, who clearly harbored justified safety concerns, complicated his instinct to protect her confidence. "I'm not in the habit of interrogating people who need help," he said carefully. "My job was to fix the tire, not investigate why she was there." He met Alexandra's piercing gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated despite the power imbalance between them. Alexandra's eyes, the same striking blue as her daughter's, narrowed slightly. An admirable principle. "However, given that Lily has mentioned you several times since yesterday and seems inexplicably impressed by your assistance, I find myself needing to understand exactly who you are." Her gaze flicked to a tablet on her desk, and Jack had the distinct impression she was consulting notes about him. Jackson Edward Morgan, 42, widower, former senior mechanical engineer at Westbrook Automotive Design, until their downsizing 5 years ago, opened Morgan's Repairs shortly thereafter. Son Ethan, age 9, currently in 4th grade at Millfield Elementary. Exceptional academic performance despite limited resources. Outstanding medical debt of approximately $137,000 from your late wife Emily's cancer treatments. Current credit score 612. Monthly income approximately 40% below your pre-downsizing salary. The clinical recitation of his life reduced to data points, and financial struggles sent a surge of anger through Jack. He set his coffee cup down with deliberate control. Is this why I'm here? For you to remind me of my circumstances? I'm well aware of them, thank you. The edge in his voice was unmistakable. To her credit, Alexandra didn't appear offended by his tone. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, studying him with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. You misunderstand. I'm not judging your circumstances. I'm trying to reconcile them with your actions. You closed your business early, losing potential income you clearly need to help a stranger. You refused payment. According to Lily, you were on your way to coach your son's baseball team, but delayed that commitment to assist her. She leaned forward slightly. Why? The question seemed genuine, as if Jack's basic decency was somehow a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. It struck him then that Alexandra Hayes, for all her success and power, might actually be confused by simple kindness without ulterior motive. Because she needed help, he said simply. She was a kid, alone, upset. What else would anyone do? The answer seemed to both satisfy and perplex Alexandra. You'd be surprised, she replied, a shadow crossing her face. In my experience, people rarely act without calculation of benefit. Jack studied her more carefully, noticing for the first time the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, concealed beneath expert makeup. With respect, that's a pretty cynical worldview. It's a realistic one in my position. She stood abruptly, moving to the window. Her silhouette against the gray sky created a striking image of isolation. 4 years ago, there was a kidnapping attempt on Lily. Her father, my ex-husband, intervened. He was shot twice. Though he survived, the brain damage was significant. He no longer recognizes Lily or remembers their relationship. She visits him monthly in a specialized care facility in Switzerland. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Jack thought of Lily's unfinished sentence about her father, the pain evident even in what remained unsaid. The pieces of her behavior fell into place, the tracking apps, the security protocols, the anxiety about being late. Alexandra wasn't just an overprotective parent, she was a mother trying to prevent lightning from striking twice. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know. The words felt inadequate against the weight of her revelation, but they were sincere. Alexandra's shoulders tensed, then relaxed slightly. Few do. We've kept the details private to protect Lily from media attention and to avoid encouraging similar attempts. She turned back to face him, composure fully restored. So perhaps you understand now why a stranger taking an interest in my daughter raises certain concerns. Jack felt a flash of indignation. I didn't take an interest in your daughter. I fixed her tire and let her use my phone. The implication that his motives might be suspect rankled him. He was a father himself. He understood the drive to protect, and made quite an impression in doing so. Alexandra returned to her desk, opening a folder. Lily has asked that you handle all maintenance for her vehicle going forward. She's also expressed interest in visiting your shop to learn basic automotive maintenance, something she claims would be useful knowledge, despite having a full-time driver at her disposal. Jack was taken aback. Lily had seemed grateful, yes, but this level of impact from such a brief interaction surprised him. Look, I was just doing my job. Alexandra's expression softened fractionally. Which brings me to my proposition. She slid a document across the desk. Hayes Innovations has multiple corporate vehicles, as well as employees' personal vehicles that require regular maintenance. Currently, we contract with Prestige Automotive in the city at considerable expense and inconvenience. I'm prepared to offer you an exclusive service contract to handle all our fleet maintenance needs. Jack stared at the document, the proposed monthly retainer figure, causing him to blink twice to ensure he wasn't misreading. It was more than triple his current monthly income. The amount would not only cover his expenses, but would allow him to pay down Emily's medical debt, rebuild Ethan's college fund, and perhaps even hire additional help at the shop. It was, in business terms, a lifeline. But Jack couldn't help feeling there was more to this offer than simple automotive maintenance. Why would you do this? Alexandra's expression remained impassive. It's a business decision. Your qualifications exceed our current providers, your location is more convenient to our campus, and my daughter trusts you, a rare occurrence these days. The explanation sounded reasonable, logical even. But Jack wasn't convinced. This felt like something else, a way to monitor him, perhaps, or to create an obligation. And if I refuse? The question slipped out before he could reconsider. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, as if the possibility hadn't occurred to her. That would be your prerogative. Though I admit, I'd find it curious to refuse an arrangement that would clearly benefit your financial situation and provide for your son's future. There it was, the subtle reminder of his precarious circumstances, the implied question of whether he could afford to turn down such an opportunity. For a moment, Jack felt the weight of Ethan's future in his hands. This contract would solve so many problems, open so many doors that had seemed permanently closed. And yet, something in him resisted being neatly categorized as a problem Alexandra Hayes could solve with her checkbook. Jack stood, surprising himself with his next words. "Miss Hayes, Alexandra, I appreciate the offer, but I'd like some time to consider it. This feels complicated." She studied him with newfound interest, as if he'd just become a more complex puzzle. "You're not what I expected, Jack Morgan." There was a hint of respect in her tone that hadn't been there before. "I could say the same about you." The words escaped before he could filter them. For the first time, a genuine smile briefly transformed her face, softening the sharp angles of authority into something unexpectedly warm. "Fair enough. Take the contract. Review it. My number is on the card attached." As the conversation drew to a close and Jack prepared to leave, Alexandra asked one final question that caught him off guard. "Your son, Ethan Lilly, mentioned you're coaching his baseball team. Are you any good?" The question was so unexpected, so disarmingly normal, that Jack found himself smiling. Terrible, actually. But I show up, which seems to be what matters most to him. Something unreadable flickered in Alexandra's eyes. Indeed, sometimes presence matters more than performance. She extended her hand. "I look forward to your decision, Jack." As the same silent driver transported him back to his shop, Jack found himself reviewing the encounter, trying to reconcile the formidable CEO with the glimpses of the concerned mother beneath the polished exterior. The contract in his hands represented financial security he hadn't dared hope for since Emily's death. Yet something about the arrangement felt like accepting more than just a business opportunity. It felt like stepping into the complicated world of Alexandra and Lily Hayes, with all its unspoken currents and hidden vulnerabilities. 2 weeks after accepting the Hayes Innovations contract, a decision made primarily because Jack couldn't justify refusing what would ensure Ethan's college fund remained untouched, Morgan's repairs had undergone subtle but significant change. A new hydraulic lift system had been installed, a necessary upgrade for servicing our executive vehicles, Alexandra had insisted, overriding Jack's protests. The waiting area now featured comfortable seating and a coffee station. Most notably, Jack had hired Miguel, a talented mechanic who had lost his previous job when the dealership closed, allowing the shop to handle both the Hayes account and regular customers. Jack had insisted on keeping his regular clientele, despite Alexandra's suggestion that the Hayes contract could fully occupy the shop. "These people have been with me from the beginning," he'd explained. "I'm not turning them away now." To his surprise, Alexandra had respected this decision, though she'd insisted on upgrades to the facility that would reflect the quality of service provided. October had brought an early cold snap, and Jack was inspecting the heating system in Alexandra's personal Tesla when his phone rang. Ethan's school number flashed on the screen, sending a jolt of parental alarm through him. "Mr. Morgan? This is Nurse Winters from Millfield Elementary," the voice said without preamble. "Ethan has a fever of 102. He needs to be picked up immediately." Jack glanced at the partially disassembled luxury vehicle. The Hayes account had strict timelines. Alexandra's car was expected back by 3 o'clock for an important meeting. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he promised, already calculating whether Miguel could finish the job alone. As he wiped his hands and reached for his keys, the shop door opened, bringing with it a gust of autumn air and, unexpectedly, Lily Hayes. At 17, she carried herself with the practiced poise of someone raised in the public eye, but Jack had come to recognize the authentic person beneath the polished exterior during her weekly automotive education sessions, an arrangement Alexandra had reluctantly approved after Lily's persistent requests. "Hey, Mr. Morgan," she greeted, unwinding a cashmere scarf from her neck. I know I'm early for my lesson, but I finished my college applications and couldn't stand being at home with Mom hovering over every word I wrote. She paused, noticing his harried expression. What's wrong? The concern in her voice was genuine, another sign of the unlikely bond that had formed between them over the past weeks. Ethan's sick at school. I need to pick him up, but your mom's car, he began, gesturing toward the Tesla. Go, Lily said immediately. I'll tell Mom there was an unexpected technical issue. She'll be annoyed, but she'll deal. Jack hesitated. In the short time he